Ladies and gentlemen, you are locked in with Fourth and Frames. I'm your host, Rhett Manuel, joined by my co-host, Drew Scott. Our boy, Chris Battistell, could not be with us tonight, but it's all good because we got an extra special fill-in tonight. The youngest in charge, the young GOAT of the Locked on the Hooked on Fantasy podcast, Mr. Hutchinson Brown. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
And ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you guys for dropping in tonight with us, whether you were on X, whether on YouTube, wherever you are. We want to thank you for taking a little bit of time to hang out with us tonight. And of course, we have our boy right here to the right of me right now, Hutchinson Brown. My man, how the heck are you tonight?
Doing good, man. Doing good. I just hopped off of Luke for Hooked on Fantasy. I'm back here, ready to talk some free agency. It's exciting, man. It's very, very exciting.
Of course, man. So first off, go ahead and tell us a little bit of your story. How the heck did you get into fantasy? Why did you start doing this at such a young age? It's a lot of a grind. And also, tell us about Hooked on Fantasy and what you and Luke Sawhook are doing over there.
Oh, wow, man. My story. Okay, this is interesting. So I started creating fantasy football content just over 3 years ago now. I started when I was 14. I started my own Twitter account when I was 14, and I posted about a podcast that I was starting. And I started that podcast at about 14 years old. And then it's gotten me opportunities with great companies like DLF and Football Guys and a couple others. And it's just been an incredible journey from there. But that first tweet that I sent out saying, hey, I'm a 14-year-old making a podcast, it kind of blew up. And from there, I've just been just grinding, working my butt off and trying to do everything I can, take advantage of every opportunity that I can. And now I'm at where I'm at today. And it's been quite a journey, honestly. Like, it's just been insane. Like that. It's very short, that was a very short, very simple version of it. But that's kind of how I got into it. I really just sent out a tweet and it blew up, and it was like, all right, we're into this now. It became a hobby. It's like it started a hobby and then it became like a real passion for me. This has become something I want to keep for the rest of my life if I can.
Yeah, dude, that's so dope because I'm just sitting here. I was like a year ago, 37 years old, and I was like, yo, let's give this a shot. I couldn't imagine I have a 14-year-old in my house right now, and I'm just going to go ahead and say this, and that it's like, yo, he's on his game and a lot of stuff, but you were like, yo, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to start a podcast. I'm just going to jump into this head first at 14 years old.
It was COVID time. We had nothing to do.
That's fair. Dude, that is so true. So yeah, it's just such a cool story. And we appreciate you being in here tonight. Before we go any further, man, go ahead and tell us everything that you kind of got going on inside and outside of the fantasy world.
Oh, yes. I mean, you guys can follow me on Twitter. I mean, it says on my little name here on the thing. I'm at HutchinsonB_FF. And I create content with Football Guys. I create content with DLF and the editor for their podcast over there, the DLF Dynasty podcast. And then I'm co-host with Luke Sawhook on Hooked on Fantasy. And we do that every Wednesday night live, and that posts on podcast apps on Thursday mornings. So if you missed this past show on Wednesday night, you can check it out Thursday, whenever you get your podcasts. And I'm just a teenager trying to make his way in the fantasy football space. And any love or support would be greatly, greatly appreciated.
You got some love and support already in the YouTube comments, man, already. So
yeah, I see a little bit. Yeah, thank you, guys.
Our co-host, Chris Battistell, usually who would be with us tonight but can't be. I know that he, we all as a group have been looking forward to having you on the show, Hutch. So I know Chris
thank you, guys.
Was pleasure not to have you on. And then, Keith Fleming, another Fantasy and Frames family member, is also a big fan as well. So, definitely a lot of supporters already in the YouTube comments. So, folks, if you're just tuning in, if you didn't believe the hype is real, man. Hutch knows what he's talking about. He's got a lot of fans here in the fantasy industry. We have him on here for a reason, and the YouTube comments are already backing it up. So I'm so excited for this show, man.
Yeah, me too. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and just drop this sponsor from Underdog Fantasy, guys. And remember to use the promo code FRAMES to double your first deposit up to $100. Because honestly, people, what's better than free money? Hopefully winning with some of that free money. So underdog.com, promo code FRAMES. And just remember, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-639-8783 to get the help you need. Once again, that is underdog.com, promo code FRAMES. So look, let's get into the reason why we're here, guys, and let's talk a little bit of free agency. I don't know about you guys, but Hutch, I was sitting here the first couple of days and I'm like, all right, a few things might pop off in these first couple of days. It should be interesting. We'll see what happens. Dog, really quickly, were we expecting this?
It was like absolutely insane. So it was a hilarious thing because I totally forgot about legal tampering period for a second. Like I totally forgot about that happening. I was like, oh my goodness, that's happening today. And then I was working out downstairs and I was gassed. I was tired. And I checked my phone and all of a sudden I see DeAndre Swift to the Bears. I'm like, what? And then like the legal tampering is like everyone's typing the legal tampering period. And then I see DeAndre Swift immediately to the Bears. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then like 5 seconds later, I see Tony Pollard to the Titans. I'm like, holy crap. And then it's just a stretch of news. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous. I'm tired right now. My legs are burning. I cannot handle this right now. And I was just so not caught up with anything. It was wild.
We really got to shout out the guys that work out these deals, because it's truly magical to me how
unreal
5 minutes into legal tampering period, we already have an entire deal worked out with incentives and
everything,
and
everything
player options, team options. Somehow magically all of it gets worked out 5 minutes into legal tampering period. It's almost like there's like an illegal tampering period going on that that we don't really talk about. It's pretty wild. So shout out to those agents that are working overtime, to get these deals done 5 minutes into free agency. I'm not going to complain at all because I'm the NFL is just like a league where I'm just always wanting more and they just keep delivering. So I'm not complaining by any means, but hey, to the agents that are working out these deals, 5 minutes into the tampering period, shout out to you guys, man.
Yeah. And the amount of adrenaline and dopamine that was running through our bodies for those few hours of just ridiculousness. It was just like, oh my God. It was just injecting everything into our veins. It was just absolutely wild.
Absolutely.
So fun.
To speak about these agents, man, I got a friend who does this on the side, Paul Duracell, represents Jeffrey Simmons, got that deal done last summer, is representing Keon Coleman, getting him ready right now for the NFL draft and everything. So, I can speak for a fact, talking to him, that this guy does not stop working, whether it's, doing these seminars to get his name out there, help other people out, like get these other deals going on. I mean, how hard this dude works is just unreal. So if y'all hear the name Paul Duracell, that's where that's coming from. But he's just one of these guys, he's only got a couple of these dudes. I mean, I can't imagine with some of these guys who have been in the league for years, your Lee Steinbergs, those types of guys, those legends and those up and comers, like they might not even have to work as hard, but those up and comers certainly do as well. But let's go ahead and let's start talking about these running backs, guys, because oh boy, to get us started, Hutch Brown, give us your reaction initially to what I thought was the biggest signing among running backs, which was Saquon to Philly, 4 years, $38 million. Avengers Assemble, man. What were your thoughts?
I'm gonna be honest. So as a Philly fan, I like the deal. I think paying him to his age 30 season with how much money we're paying him is a little tough, a little confusing as a Philly fan. But for fantasy football, I think there were not many better landing spots for Saquon Barkley. I feel like this is a perfect landing spot because before he was on a trash Giants team, very confusing quarterback play, changing in head coaches 3 different times in his 6-year career. And then you have the offensive line, which over the last 2 years have been bottom 6 in run block win rate. And then you look at Philadelphia and their offensive line, top 2 over the last 2 seasons, each of the last 2 seasons in run block win rate. I know they just lost Jason Kelsey, but they gave Dickerson a giant contract. They've got so much talent on this offensive line. They're going to be okay without Kelsey. I think if Jalen Hurts threatening the run, it's going to open so many run lanes. And now I feel like people are overthinking this a little bit. They're complaining a lot about, he's not going to get pass catching work and the goal lines works to be taken away. First off, to the goal line, he wasn't getting many goal line carries in New York. That offense was trash, and they never visited the red zone. Like Saquon was never getting the rushing touchdowns we wanted him to anyway. He's probably going to get more in Philly than he was in New York, even with the tush push happening. And then looking at the reception work, over the last few seasons, after his 2018 rookie season where he caught 91 passes, since then, in the fully healthy seasons he's played, he averages around 40 to 45 catches a season. DeAndre Swift just had 39 this past year. If you're telling me Saquon is in that offense where 39 catches just went to DeAndre Swift, Saquon's going to catch 45 plus. Like that's just where we're going to be at by the end of the season, as long as he stays fully healthy. So Saquon's set up for a workhorse role in elite offense with a great offensive line, and hopefully, depending on which Jalen Hurts we get, a great quarterback. I feel like people are overthinking this for fantasy. He's going to be a stud. He's going to be an absolute stud as long as he's healthy.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, Drew, in terms of ranking, I don't know what you've done yet, but in terms of where you had Saquon ranked, is he up? Is he down? Is he level? What's he doing?
I'd
Drew?
like to hear this. Yeah,
he's up for me, man, for sure. Like, I mean, look, if you want to complain about the tush push and you're scared about that, fair, fine. I get it. He might lose a couple touchdowns that he would possibly get, if the tush push wasn't a thing. But how many touchdowns, like Hutch has already said, how many touchdowns was he getting in New York in the first place? Like, even if you subtract the tush push touchdowns, the man is still going to be in scoring position a lot more than he was this time last year. And so, like, that doesn't even factor into it for me. Like, I'm not worried about that at all. To me, he's elevated 100% compared to where he was this time last year in New York. Like, no, it's a better offensive line. It's a better offensive as a whole. And I don't see any negative for Saquon's value, even considering the tush push. I find it hard to find where this is negative for Saquon.
Guys, and I'll start with you, Hutch, and I'll go to Drew. Do you guys think there are any losers in this offense with Saquon signing? Does this pass game take a little bit of a hit? Is it AJ? Is it Devontae? Or is it wheels up on everybody at this point?
I mean, for a hot second, we were like Kenneth Gainwell's the lead back for the Eagles for a second, but I don't think anyone really expected that. So Kenneth Gainwell obviously lose because for a hot second he was the only back in Philly, but not anymore. But I would want to say, because if Saquon has a more of an impact in the receiving game than DeAndre Swift did, I'm getting a little concerned about Dallas Goedert, because last year Goddard was he was not good for fantasy, man. They did not use him at all. And those short field areas, that's where Dallas Goedert that's where he's primarily used. And if Saquon takes a lot of those screens, a lot of those middle of the field opportunities, those little holes in the zone right there in the middle of the field for a dump off, I think that might hurt Goddard a tad even more than he was last year. So I'm getting a little concerned about Goddard, but overall, I don't see a major loser here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with Hutch completely. That's the Dallas Goedert really was the main guy that I took some points away from, because for at the tight end position for fantasy purposes, we prefer these guys to be at worst the second option as far as pass catching goes. Now for Dallas Goedert, that really hasn't been the case for a couple of years with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, but you at least had the touchdown upside. Now you have even another pass catching weapon once they get into the red zone. Now, if there were any Kenny Gainwell believers left, you're probably dead.
I wasn't a believer anyway.
No, right. There were still some truthers out there. Now at this point, if you're still a Kenny Gainwell truther, I feel bad for you, son. But hopefully you let go at this point. But I think you have to downgrade all the pass catchers at least a little bit, because Saquon presents the Eagles' first option of being a true 3-down back, where like even DeAndre Swift, he's not a bad pass catcher, but he's just not a Saquon Barkley level talent. Like whenever you bring in a guy that's that talented at a contract that he demands, you have to at least downgrade the other options a little bit. But like, I'm not, from a fantasy perspective, I'm not super concerned about about Devontae Smith. I'm not super concerned about AJ Brown. And I love the spot for Saquon Barkley. It's just the ancillary pieces like the Dallas Goedert, or if you wanted to grab Kenneth Gainwell late, like that's not near as exciting for me anymore now that we have Saquon as opposed to DeAndre Swift. So I think it's those outside pieces that, and I know Jorge likes to give me a lot of crap because last year I considered Dallas Goedert a must-start tight end whenever he was healthy, because he was in a very potent offense, and he was like a third best option. But that's not the case anymore, and we have to stay water, and we have to adjust our beliefs as new news becomes new news, as the Kelseys say. But comes abroad, we have to react to that, and so I think Dallas Goedert, I agree with Hutch 100%, and no surprise that the dude that is a great fantasy mind and also an Eagles fan on top of that is right on top of the analysis here. I could not agree more. I think that Goddard's the main guy I would be most concerned about, but at this point, it'd be tough to be super excited about him anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you guys more. So here's the question, because we just talked about one of Hutch's guys in Saquon Barkley, and now we have the jersey right behind him. He may have to retire that now because Derrick Henry is now a Baltimore Ravens. So for me, guys, I'm still going to be high on Keaton Mitchell heading into the season. I just love the upside and Derrick Henry approaching that dicey age 30 threshold for running backs. It's a little bit scary, but I want to see where you guys are. Let's start off with Drew. Drew, Derrick Henry, Baltimore. What are your thoughts, man?
Overall, I like it. I mean, it's kind of a dream landing spot in terms of him having extremely open running lanes. Whenever you look at, yards before contact in Tennessee versus the yards before contact that Baltimore running backs such as Gus Edwards has experienced, I think that he's, it's going to be a tough situation because I do think Keaton Mitchell is going to provide a extremely great change of pace option, but at the same time, there's going to be scoring opportunities there. And Derrick Henry is going to, I mean, how many touchdowns did Gus Edwards have last year?
I think he had 15. I'm pretty sure he had 15. Yeah. Well, I'll search that real quick.
Gus the Bus is a stud. Like he should not, that should not just be swept off the, it's just, it's just the Baltimore offense. Like Gus Edwards, up until last year, Gus Edwards averaged 5 yards a carry every year of his career. Like Gus Edwards is a good running back, and he's somebody whenever we talk about the Chargers later that I'm sure we'll talk about at least briefly, but like he was never paid the money Derrick Henry's being paid. And now he's being brought into this situation where I'm sure we'll talk about Tennessee a little bit later. The Tennessee running back situation makes no sense to me, whereas the Baltimore running back situation makes all the sense in the world to me, because you have that thunder and lightning to maybe the best extent we've ever seen, where Keaton Mitchell provides the lightning, but Derrick Henry provides the thunder. And like Tennessee might not have been in scoring situations a ton last year, but Baltimore is going to be in those scoring situations plenty next year. And you be a defensive player for a second and you tell me who you're going to focus in on between Lamar and Derrick Henry whenever you're 5 yards from scoring a touchdown. Like, hey, don't worry, I'll wait, because I don't want to be the guy that has to try to figure that out. And so I think that, if for some reason you play in any standard scoring leagues, or if you play in half PPR leagues, I think Derrick Henry is going to be a great value. Now, full PPR is where it's going to get a little bit shaky, because I don't think he's going to have the pass catching numbers, and then you're going to essentially be relying on touchdowns. But it's hard not to be excited about this situation with Derrick Henry in Baltimore. I'm very excited. I'm trying to temper expectations, but I'm not doing a great job of it. So maybe one of you guys feels different. I don't know.
Hutch?
Honestly, I'm not gonna lie. I'm very bullish on Derrick Henry in Baltimore. I'm pretty bullish here, so I'm gonna hype the train up even a little bit more here. Yeah, I love all the points you made with the open run lanes and the trips to the red zone. It's really going to be there. But another couple of things I want to talk about. You mentioned the passing game. The problem is the passing game has never really been there for Derrick Henry. He's always been a fantasy stud anyway. And also, I want to correct myself. Gus Edwards 13 last year, not 15. I was incorrect there. He had 13 rushing touchdowns last year, zero receiving touchdowns. But Club Savella just commented, Derrick Henry, the Ravens is a smash spot. And also, I want to comment too, I think Derrick Henry in Baltimore is so good because the Baltimore Ravens, what they want to do, they showed it a lot last year, even with the new offensive coordinator change, even with everything. They want to run the football. They want to get in the lead. And in the second half, they want to run the football a lot more and just kill the opposing defense via the run and just destroy out their defense, tire out that defense. And Derrick Henry, when you look at his third quarter, fourth quarter numbers, when you look at the yards per carry and the efficiency that he holds in those quarters, it's just insane because he's so physical, so dominant. He tears defenses apart in the first half and then completely obliterates them in the second half when they're tired out. And Baltimore is the perfect team to do that with because they're going to be winning and leading a lot of games this year. So I love Derrick Henry and the Ravens for everything you said, Drew, but also because that second half of those games, man, he already did it a ton in Tennessee, even though they weren't a great team at times. He's going to do it every single week in Baltimore.
And that's such a good point that I didn't even mention. Is like if you go back, even with his time in Tennessee the last year or two, if you go look at his fantasy points scored in games where they were expected to win or games where they had a positive game script versus games where they had a negative game script, like yeah, like look, if Derrick Henry's team is losing the game, if they're behind a considerable margin, it's going to hurt him, right? And in Tennessee, that would be a pretty big concern because Tennessee wasn't a good team. But now you put him on Baltimore, and you're talking about it. You're talking about a running back that, like, oh, we need him to score touchdowns and we need him to be in a positive game script. Well, guess what? Can you really dream up a better team than Baltimore that's going to provide positive game scripts and is going to provide him touchdown opportunities? Like, if he was able to do what he did with Tennessee last year, we've talked about Saquon, who is great, but then there's other running backs we're going to talk about. Like Derrick Henry, approaching his age 30 season, was still more efficient than guys like DeAndre Swift and Tony Pollard, who also got paid that we'll talk about later. And he's on better situations as well. He's in a better situation as well in terms of just, general team is. So I'm trying to stay calm here, but I find myself getting hot and bothered just trying to keep myself calm. So it's tough. No,
it's pretty difficult. He could legit score like 16 plus rush touchdowns this year.
Yeah,
that'll immediately put him in that top 5 conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's move into the other side of this, because now we got to talk about one of the guys who was taken as Derrick Henry's replacement in Tennessee. Tony Pollard, 3 years, $24 million. Let's go through it quickly, guys. Are we in? Are we out? And who's the guy to own, if any of them, between Pollard and Tajay?
Do you want to go, or you want me to start?
Guess first, man.
All right. So looking at this situation, you don't want to heavily invest in either of them. I'm going to be honest. You just don't. This is going to be a gross backfield. It's really just such a confusing signing because both of them are very similar players. They're both lighter, both great on the outside and not as great in between the tackles. But honestly, when I want to bet on one of these guys, I'm going to bet on whoever's cheaper. At this point, that's got to be Tajay Spears. It has to be, because he was the later round draft pick that was less proven than Tony Pollard, and he's getting replaced in Tennessee rather than coming into Tennessee with Pollard there. That would be flipped around. So I think Tajay Spears is definitely the cheaper option. On that day, I was thrown out on Twitter, buy Tajay Spears for like a 3rd round pick in the panic, because he's definitely going to be going for that kind of cost in Dynasty. I would be betting on Spears because honestly, watching Pollard last year, I thought he looked like terrible. I really do. Even behind that great Dallas O-line, even behind that offense, I thought he looked really bad. I was not impressed watching Pollard. And I think by the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if Tajay Spears is the 1A, and he's probably going to be significantly cheaper. So if I'm going after either of these guys, it's likely going to be Spears.
This is why we bring smart guests on our show, because I don't have to say a whole lot after that. I couldn't agree more. The only thing I'll say is it's very interesting because Tony Pollard did, like, if you look at like week 12 on down the stretch, as Tony Pollard started to recover from that injury, he did look better from efficiency standpoint than he did to start the year. But still, it's very interesting because like Tony Pollard used to be like our efficiency king. We're like, hey, just like let Zeke take a back seat, let him go somewhere else and wait and see what Tony Pollard does. And now Tony Pollard had his time in the sun for a year and he was hurt, and then now it's like, man, let our efficiency king Tajay Spears shine, and we'll see what he does, and now we got Tony Pollard to deal with. And so it's just like this beautiful marriage where Tony Pollard he's lived long enough to see himself turn into the villain as opposed to our savior. But no, I agree completely. I think it's a cost whenever it comes to these two running backs in August, whenever the drafts roll around. It's going to turn into a cost thing where if Tajay Spears is the less expensive running back, that's where I'm going to lean. And it's very similar to what we were talking about with Saquon and positive and negative game scripts, where like if I expect the Titans to not be a very great football team, come August, September. And I think that's going to put them in a lot of negative game scripts where Tajay Spears' skill set will shine. And in a half PPR or full PPR league, that's the direction that I would prefer to go. But, it's tough because right now we're reacting to news that just broke a week or so ago. So we don't know what it's going to do to their ADP. But, similar to what I think Hutch nailed it with these sentences, said that whichever running back is cheaper, that's going to be the running back to target, because we don't know how this is going to break out, and we all love Tajay Spears as a fantasy community, but the reality is the front office in Tennessee did not draft Tajay Spears, but they did go and sign Tony Pollard. And so I think that's something worth at least considering. But it's a very tough situation. It's one where you're talking about a running back by committee in an offense that I don't think is going to be all that explosive to begin with, even though there's another wide receiver signing we're going to have to talk about later, unfortunately. This as much as I don't want to talk about Tennessee anymore, we're going to have to. Yeah. It's so it's a very questionable offense. So whenever you're talking about offenses that you don't know how it's going to break out, and then you have multiple heads in the backfield, it's like, yeah, just give me the one that's cheaper. And so I agree with Hutch in that standpoint.
Yeah, me too. I'm a Tajay Spears guy. I have been since last year, Drew. You know that.
Yeah.
And if he's cheaper this year, I'm on that bus too. Be. So guys, let's move into the NFC North. They got a pair of big running back signings over there, and I want y'all to each take one of these. Hutch, I want you to answer the question on Josh Jacobs for me. Was this actually an upgrade over Aaron Jones?
Was an upgrade over Aaron Jones? I would say for the Packers, yes, because Matt LaFleur over his career, when looking at it over the career with Aaron Jones, he's had Jamal Williams, he's had A.J. Dillon in the offense. He's wanted to have a guy who can establish the run and beat up defense in the second half. That's been a thing Matt LaFleur has loved to do, especially when it gets cold up there in Wisconsin. Like it gets cold in the winter, man. And Aaron Jones, while he's a great running back and I love him, he is not someone that can establish the run like that. He's a little smaller frame back. That's not going to be able to just beat up a defense in that way. Josh Jacobs is that kind of running back. He is the one that can beat up a defense all game long. We've seen it for multiple seasons in Las Vegas. And while last year was a down year with some injuries and things, and the offense was just kind of disastrous in a lot of the season, I'm expecting big things in Green Bay. They've made some upgrades to this offensive line. This is a young, growing offense with a great quarterback. I'm thinking Matt LaFleur, as an offensive genius, is going to find ways to use Jacobs in so many ways and build him into an elite fantasy running back. I'm very excited for Jacobs because, who else is in the backfield right now? Because A.J. Dillon's a free agent. He's gone.
Yeah, right. Actually, is he now? He is. Yeah. A.J. Dillon's a free agent, right? Yep.
Yeah, he's a free agent. He's gone. Jones is gone, obviously. Who else is there?
Wheels up for Josh Jacobs, man.
Josh Jacobs.
So, Drew, let's move it to you because the Minnesota Vikings have to be over the moon right now. They went from Alexander Madison to low-key getting one of the better upgrades of a backfield this offseason in Aaron Jones, right?
Yeah. Whatever you just look at, improvements from one backfield to another. Yeah, going from Alexander Madison and Ty Chandler to Aaron Jones, man. You got an upgrade off the rip immediately. Now, it's tough because again, we don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be in Minnesota. We have no is Sam Darnold really the guy, or are they targeting a guy in the NFL draft? We'll find out here in a month or so. But one for one, if you told me I need one season out of an NFL running back, and you can tell me both these guys are going to stay healthy, I'm not 100% sure that Josh Jacobs is a better running back than Aaron Jones, just in terms of talent. Now we're talking there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? Aaron Jones is several years he's older and he's had injuries to deal with, so it's not an even playing field by any means. But whenever you just look at both running backs on an even playing field, assuming health for both, I'm not convinced on a 1-year period that Josh Jacobs is that much better of a running back than Aaron Jones. Now, I would agree. I would take Jacobs over Aaron Jones whenever you factor in age and injury history and things like that. But but Minnesota is very tricky because also, we don't know what they're going to do at quarterback, and so it becomes very, very difficult to deal with. But from a redraft perspective, I'm still just as excited about Aaron Jones as I would have been if he would have been in Green Bay. So it's nice to see that we have that clarity, at least pre-draft. We'll see if Minnesota invest a day 2 draft pick and a running back, then all bets are off. But assuming Aaron Jones survives the NFL draft cycle, I think we have a lot of reasons to be excited about his role in this offense and what Kevin O'Connell will do with him. So I don't think it's time to write Aaron Jones off as dead yet. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So, guys, I want to get into one of these now that I think is one of the weirder moves of this free agency cycle. Joe Mixon, we thought he was going to be released. Then the news comes out the next morning. My boy is traded to the Houston Texans, who are apparently going all in. Guys, that running back by committee with Devin Singletary was solid last year. So I want to ask the question, Hutch, why this move for Houston? And then Drew, what is Joe Mixon's fantasy value? Because I was down on him last year. I thought he was starting to show signs of inefficiency. Is this really an improvement for them in the long run, guys?
So looking at Mixon now as a Houston Texan, I mean, I honestly think it's a solid move. Given Houston's struggles to run the ball like last year, I mean, Dameon Pierce was just a complete disaster. And then eventually they were able to find that Devin Singletary was a good asset. But now he's gone. He's with the New York Giants on a really sizable contract, by the way. But Mixon with the Texans is just perfect. I mean, he's kind of going to a similar situation than he was in Cincinnati. 2 great wide receivers on the outside. Then you have a great quarterback and a very solid offensive line, a serviceable offensive line. And you have a ton of volume waiting for him. They need a running back. They just really do need a running back that can take a lot of carries, take some dump offs away, and help CJ Stroud out as he develops even more into the league. So I love this move by Houston to get a big-time running back for CJ Stroud as he develops. Because the thing is, since they have Stroud on the rookie contract, they can pay a running back some money if they want to.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, for Joe Mixon specifically, like you like the experienced running backs that have that they come into a situation where where they're going to come in. But Scott Barrett at Scott Barrett DFB, he put a very at least something to get us thinking, right? To where like Dameon Pierce was a guy I didn't like a lot at the draft cycle this time last year, as a runner in Houston, and the man gap concept runs from 2022 to 2023. Pierce averaged 4 yards per carry. Joe Mixon averaged 4.4 yards per carry, almost 4.5 yards per carry. And then in zone runs, which is the world that Houston now lives in because they have the Slowick Shanahan influence offense, right? They have the zone run offense that Shanahan built in San Francisco. Dameon Pierce averaged 3.44 yards per carry, and Joe Mixon averaged 3.35 yards per carry in that type of offense. So you at least have the system fit questions, but then at the same time, like these coaching staffs that are also considering these things, they're the ones that went out and made these moves, right? So it's like we can be concerned about them from a fantasy standpoint, but the guys that are making these decisions, making these trades, I'm sure they have considered these things long before we did. And before making these trades. So it's at least something worth noting. But whenever you really just take it at face value, Joe Mixon is a running back that has he has experience. He can handle volume. And now he's in a situation where he's in a good offense where he's going to be asked to do specific things that he was already asked to do in Cincinnati. So like me personally, I was hoping that they would just re-sign Devin Singletary because of how good he looked in that system, and I feel like that would go a little underrated, and we'd be able to get him for value come August. Now, Joe Mixon has a name value. He's familiar to everybody, and now he's in a even arguably just as good, if not better, offense. So the discount does not exist anymore. And so it just becomes if you're a contender in Dynasty, I think Joe Mixon's a good buy. If you're a seller in Dynasty, like if you're a team that's looking to rebuild in Dynasty, I think he's a really good sell at this point. But I don't think Joe Mixon's value really changes that much, to be honest with you. Like it didn't move for Joe Mixon specifically. It did not move the needle one way or another too much for me because he went from one really good offense to another really good offense. And I think he's going to play the same role.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Joe Mixon is going to be one of these guys. I think personally a little bit overrated for me, but I think, like you said, they're doing the homework. They got to know what they're getting themselves into. It's clear that Houston is going all in, and if you're going to go all in, you want a guy who's been there. He's played in the Super Bowl. I think Joe Mixon is one of those guys for sure. So quickly, let's get into a little bit of zero RB musical chairs. I want you guys to choose your favorite move among these three for fantasy purposes. DeAndre Swift to Chicago, Antonio Gibson to New England, or Austin Eckler to Washington. Hutch, let's go with you first, and then let's go to Drew after that. So
hold on. I'm gonna take another one because I think I know who Drew wants to take. I'm actually gonna take a different one here. I'm gonna go with Austin Eckler. I think this one is more interesting than people think. People are labeling this as a really gross signing. It is a gross signing. Eckler didn't look great last year, but honestly, like I feel like people overrate that one run against Green Bay. Like he had that one run against Green Bay on the sideline that we all thought like he looks like he was carrying tuba. But honestly, through the rest of the season, I thought he looked okay. He didn't look great, but I thought he looked okay. And he's going to a situation now in Washington where they need a pass catching back. Brian Robinson has hands for hands. He can't catch. That dude can't catch. They now have a pass catcher running back in Eckler, and they're going to be drafting a rookie quarterback. I mean, assuming so. I don't see any other world besides that. They're going to be signing a rookie quarterback, and a rookie under pressure with that offensive line, especially in Washington, that has been bad over the last year, is going to be looking for dump offs. And Eckler is a quarterback's best friend. He's been Herbert's best friend over the last handful of seasons with him. And I think he's going to do the same for a rookie in Washington. So I see this kind of as a Leonard Fournette in Tampa situation where you've got a ton of dump offs, but the running efficiency just isn't there. But you've got a ton of dump offs to the point where in a half PPR or full PPR format, he's a really good fantasy asset. So Eckler will be someone I will be keeping an eye on in draft because I think he's going to be extremely undervalued. It's going to be gross, but I think he's going to be undervalued.
Oh, yeah. Drew, pop off, King. I know where you're going right now.
Yeah, I know where you're going too. I wanted to leave it for you.
So, the easy answer is DeAndre Swift, right?
Yeah,
Austin Eckler, my only concern is people overdrafting him just off of name value. And I know nobody on this screen is going to do that, but just like my concern, once we get into like home league drafts, is my concern is somebody's going to see Austin Eckler on the draft board. They're like, auto click, I'm going to take him, even though he really is just in a pass catching value. Now, in sharper leagues, I agree, Hutch. I think he could turn into a value as people start to fade him because he's not the 3-down back that we want in Los Angeles and things like that. But yeah, I think DeAndre Swift is the layup answer for those guys, just simply because my king Antonio Gibson has to deal with Ramondre Stevenson now. Hey, if Ramondre wasn't there, I'd be on here trying to sell houses with Antonio Gibson hype. But unfortunately, I can't do that. Even though I'm just going to say the guy was a top 12, top 13 running back his first 2 years before they decided to misuse him. And something that never made sense to me was, we're going to take this running back in the league that played receiver at Memphis, and we're going to try to turn him into just a 2-down running back like that. That's something that only the previous Washington regime could cook up and be like, this is a really good plan. So I think that he does have value in New England, because I do think that New England will at least use him correctly, because, they went out. I mean, they won a free agency. They went out and signed Antonio Gibson, and that's not like that was somebody that was at high demand at the top of the chart. So I think they have a plan for him. But for the names that you mentioned, I think DeAndre Swift is the guy to talk about. And Hutch, I appreciate you giving me the layup on that one.
Yeah, I love DeAndre Swift. I could have totally gone off about him. I'm so excited for him. But I also liked Eckler, so I was like, I'm gonna talk about Eckler here because no one's gonna talk about him.
He's the tougher one to talk about. So I think Swift is also very he's very controversial for me, because I'm a very big Khalil Herbert fan, and I think I could make the argument that just from a pure running back standpoint, like not factoring in pass catching, not factoring in run blocking, I think that you could make the argument using advanced metrics that Khalil Herbert has been the better between the tackles runner than DeAndre Swift over the last couple of years. But I am not on the coaching staff, and clearly if the coaching staff agreed, they wouldn't have brought in DeAndre Swift, right? So that's neither here nor there. I'm just saying that follow the money, follow what the team's telling you, and they made DeAndre Swift a priority on day one of free agency. So I think he could provide a really good security blanket for what I expect to be a rookie quarterback coming into that situation. And I'm also, as much as I love Khalil Herbert, I'm even a bigger DeAndre Swift fan. And so I have no problem with the signing, and it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. So, guys, let's quickly go around the frames real quick. Let's just give a quick answer on this. All right, Cincinnati next year, who's the top dog, Zach Moss or Chase Brown?
I think Chase Brown is better, but I think they're drafting a running back.
Ooh, that's a good point too.
I think they're going to draft somebody. So I don't see anyone emerging from that backfield that we want. Zach Moss fell off towards the end of last season. So between the two of them, I bet on Chase Brown, but I think whoever they drafted might be better.
I wish I had the data to throw it up on screen, but there was some data I saw about running backs out of the shotgun formation and how they fared, and Zach Moss was toward the end of the line in terms of efficiency. And then, whenever you look at how often Cincinnati and Indianapolis deployed running backs in that position, they were both toward the top of the league in that. So he's going to a situation that is very familiar with what he was seeing success in at the beginning of the year. So I think there's room for him to develop there. But I agree with Hutch if they Cincinnati is a prime landing spot for a rookie running back.
Yeah, that's not bad. So Gus Edwards goes to LA. This feels like a committee setup, but give me your money on who you think the lead back is next year in LA. And yes, Blake Corum is a possible answer.
Yeah, Blake Corum is my answer then. Blake Corum.
Yeah. The Chargers are absolutely drafting Blake Corum in day 2. But
100%.
that's going to be the one guy that's really going to test my patience, because watching the tape and looking at the advanced metrics, I don't think Blake Corum is all that special of a running back. But now we have an NFL head coach that was also his head coach in college that is going to have plenty of opportunities to draft him on day 2. And so that one's going to be tricky, man, because I'm not that high on Blake Corum particularly, but if he gets day 2 draft capital, I'm going to have to change my tune.
Yeah, agreed. So guys, let's quickly get into these wide receivers. And I want to start off by talking about a guy that I've always loved. Michael Pittman got that franchise tag and then agrees to an extension with the Indianapolis Colts. Drew, let's ask the question, because personally for me, I think this might be low key the best move, whether it's football or fantasy, for a team in free agency. What are your thoughts on Pittman, man?
I mean, all things considered, I would agree. It was between Michael Pittman and T. Higgins were the two guys to where, like, looking at other receivers that could possibly be affected by free agency moves, they were the two guys I was most concerned about. Calvin Ridley being third, and we'll talk about him, I'm sure. But I think Michael Pittman is a stud. You know what he was able to do with Gardner Minshew at quarterback last year, and hats off to Shane Steichen and that coaching staff there for calling the games that they called with everything they had available to them. But Michael Pittman's a stud. He's a legitimate receiver in this league and should be treated as such. And I'm extremely excited to see what Anthony Richardson, who I don't really have to tell you that I'm high on coming into this year, but I'm excited to see what he can do with a locked-in Michael Pittman as well. We'll see what they do with the draft, but yeah, I think that between him and T. Higgins, flip a coin, take your pick. I think those were the two guys I was really most interested in, and so it was really good to see him get that bag.
So, Hutch, Deontay Johnson traded to the Carolina Panthers. Two-edge question for you. What's the Deontay Johnson ceiling, and what's the Bryce Young ceiling?
So, man, this is really, really interesting. When I look at Deontay Johnson in this situation, because here's the thing, guys. I personally, when I see the thing is with Bryce Young, I try to go back and watch the film, man. I try to go back and watch him play and see what I can find out of him. I gotta be honest. The offensive line and the receivers were not helping him, but he was not helping himself. Like, he really just didn't look good to me. I really was not impressed with Bryce Young. And this was a guy coming from a guy who had him as his QB1 coming out of the class. I had him over Stroud, like a 1A, 1B situation. I did not like what I saw from Young. So I'm looking at Deontay Johnson in a situation similar to where he was in 2020, 2021, where Big Ben, he was kind of losing it, but he was still giving Deontay Johnson a ton of volume. And as a result, Deontay Johnson was a really good asset in PPR fantasy football. So that's kind of how I'm seeing Deontay, Club Fantasy Deontay to the moon. He's always going to be, I think he'll be a really good target hog for this offense. I think it'll be safe for PPR formats, but the ceiling for both Young and Deontay, I don't see is very high. I will say, though, the Panthers have done a really good job building around Bryce Young this offseason. They've done the best they could with the draft picks they had and the salary they've had. Giving him some tackles, some guards, giving him that wide receiver and Deontay Johnson. So I will say the Panthers have done a good job at building around Bryce Young. I'm just not confident that he's got the talent. He really did not help himself out last year, and I just didn't see any flashes whatsoever. I saw basically none.
So, Drew, let's move into you. Mike Evans back with the Tampa Bay Bucks. This is actually the first piece of news that we got last week. 2 years, $52 million.
Correct.
My man has been in the league for a long time, doing it for a long time. Drew, I have to ask you the question. How many years do you think are left in the Mike Evans fantasy tank? 2 years, short-term deal. Has to think that they probably think he has 2 years left in him, huh?
Yeah, I think it's a fair bet to make, and it's pretty much. Look, if I'm betting on Mike Evans, he's gonna have 1,000 yards. Book it. He's gonna have he's gonna flirt with 10 touchdowns, but he's gonna have 1,000 yards, and there's room for that in fantasy trash, right? Like I'm good with close to 1,000 with 1,000 yards and close to 10 touchdowns on my fantasy team. So it's.
Love it.
The Bucks landing, the Bucks locking in Baker on top of that, we've already seen what that can look like, right? So we don't have to. There's not a lot of what ifs or what's this going to look like. We've already seen it. So the only, I guess the only variable we have to account for is what is the offense going to look like with Dave Canales now being the head coach in Carolina as opposed to the offensive coordinator in Tampa, where he kind of, at least on our show, he started this reputation of being a quarterback fixer, where he was the offensive coordinator for Seattle the year that Geno Smith had his resurgence, and then he was the quarterback coach. I apologize. He was the quarterback coach for Seattle the year that Geno Smith had his big resurgence, and then he was the offensive coordinator for Tampa the year that Baker had last year. And so now he's the head coach for Carolina. So we talked about, the changes that Carolina has made and what that could mean for Bryce Young. So that's really the only variable we have to account for is how much is that going to affect Tampa's value, not having Dave Canales there calling plays, on the offensive side anymore. But Baker's been in the league long enough. Mike Evans has been in the league long enough. These guys are pros. They're going to figure out a way to get it done. Like, my concerns for Tampa's offense is the extended pieces beyond that. I'm not concerned about Mike Evans whatsoever. I made the mistake last year, whenever we did our divisional previews. We had to pick a must and a bust and a maybe for each play or for each team in each division whenever we were doing our divisional previews, and my dumbass was like, the bust for fantasy drafts is going to be Mike Evans because Baker Mayfield's going to target Chris Godwin in the middle of the field and he's not going to stretch the field. And man, I had that was arguably my worst call last year. And so you are going to have to catch me dead before you catch me calling Mike Evans a bust again.
Yeah, fair enough. Couple things I want to go over really quickly. Gabe Davis signs with Jacksonville. Calvin Ridley signs with the Tennessee Titans. I was going to ask about Gabe Davis and his role, but instead I want to ask about Hutch, Calvin Ridley and his role in Tennessee. Feels disgusting. And then, Drew, I want to go to you. What is the value check on Christian Kirk now that he appears to be the number one option in Jacksonville? Hutch first.
So with Calvin Ridley in Tennessee, look, I want to first talk about, first off, Traylon Burks. Any hope in him is gone. I'm going to be honest. I love Traylon Burks coming out of college. I thought he was arguably the best receiver in that draft class. But, yeah, he is toast. After a second year of disappointment, after a rookie year of disappointment, and now this signing, and with DeAndre Hopkins too, it's just, the path is just not there. But now looking at Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins and how this is going to split out, I think this is quite interesting because DeAndre Hopkins last year, I went back and watched him, look at the numbers as well. You can just look at Sleeper, look at his targets. His targets were through the roof. He was getting a lot of targets. He did nothing with them. Nothing. He genuinely looked not like DeAndre Hopkins anymore. And when you see that from a player a little bit, it doesn't get any better. It only gets so much worse. So I don't really see it as a split between DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. I see it as Calvin Ridley's the number one wide receiver for Tennessee. That's how I see it. I think Calvin Ridley's the number one receiver of Tennessee. And Will Levis, while obviously we have a lot of concerns about him, we don't know what's going on there, the Tennessee Titans have done their best to build around him and get him some receivers to help. So it is gross. It's not great, but I think Calvin Ridley actually has some fantasy value here. And I think there's a world where he's undervalued in drafts because it was so gross last year with how inconsistent he was. I think he might actually be undervalued next year because DeAndre Hopkins is not the guy that people think he is anymore. He just isn't. So I see Calvin Ridley's the clear wide receiver on this offense.
Yeah, related to that, Calvin Ridley's out the door. Christian Kirk remains in Jacksonville. Value check. I personally think Christian Kirk is going up for me, Drew. Matter of fact, I made a trade for him today. But what are your thoughts on Kirk right now?
Yeah, I think he's the stable option there in Jacksonville. It's hard not to like him for his value right now. He's not going to have the upside to win you a week, but he's going to be a very stable wide receiver two to where if I have him as my wide receiver two in a dynasty league, I'm feeling very good right now. But you still have to deal with the possibility of them drafting a receiver in the first round, and then you still have to deal with Evan Ingram, and Zay Jones and those guys as well. But they were very heavily involved, at least from what we've been made aware of from, reporting standpoint. They were very involved in the Calvin Ridley sweepstakes. They were hoping to bring him back. And so I think you have to take that into consideration. But yeah, I think I think that Christian Kirk is a very stable, reliable option, not somebody that's going to give you a ton of upside. But I think that, in terms of wide receiver two, I think he's perfect for that role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been talking all offseason how Christian Kirk is a great buy in Dynasty. And even with this Gabe Davis signing, I'm still in on it. Gabe Davis is nothing more than what he was in Buffalo. He's nothing more than what he was in Buffalo. I don't see him as a threat to Christian Kirk at all.
There's a For me personally, it's I guess it's been called the MVS rule, to where if you were if you were not good with one historically great quarterback, like he went from Aaron Rodgers to Pat Mahomes. Look, if you couldn't make it happen with Aaron Rodgers, I don't give a shit if you went to Pat Mahomes. Like it's the same thing. If you couldn't make it happen with Josh Allen, I think Trevor Lawrence is undervalued. I think he is a much better quarterback than what people are leading on to believe. But I don't think that it's an upgrade to Gabe Davis, because if you couldn't make it happen with Josh Allen, why do I think you're going to make it happen with Trevor Lawrence? Like, no, you are a role player, and that serves its purpose in the NFL world. But from the fantasy standpoint, you're dead to me.
Yeah,
100%, 100%.
Couple other receiver moves of note. We had Jerry Jeudy traded to the Browns. Darnell Mooney signs with Atlanta, 3 years, $39 million, and Kendrick Bourne goes back to New England. I'm just going to go ahead and ask the question, guys. Are any of these of significant fantasy value going forward?
I will take a stab at Darnell Mooney. I really will. I mean, Jerry Jeudy, the Broncos, I'm going to be honest, he's dead to me. I'm not going to lie. He's completely dead. He did nothing in his first 4 years. Nothing in his first 4 years in Denver. Nothing of significance, at least. And when you look at a receiver drafted in the first round, never hit 1,000 yards after 4 years, and then gets traded for a 5th and a 6th round pick to a team with a disaster of a quarterback situation, with multiple targets in front of him that are really good, in an offense that we're quite concerned about, that's just not a situation that's going to promote success for Jerry Jeudy. So I'm just not in on Jerry Jeudy at all. But I'll talk about Darnell Mooney for a second, because this kid's shown talent. Man, I remember, a couple years back where he was the wide receiver 1 for this team, and he really showed out. He really had some games where it was like, this kid is legit. It didn't really happen much with DJ Moore as the wide receiver 1 this year, though. Him and Fields had too much of a connection. But with Kirk Cousins and how much this team could be throwing the ball this year, because Kirk Cousins on the Vikings was throwing the ball an insane amount. He was on pace for a ridiculous amount of pass attempts, like Brady 2021 level numbers, where it was just like unbelievable amount of pass attempts. But now he's in Atlanta, and you got Kyle Pitts, you got Drake London, obviously. But then you have Darnell Mooney, who can be a very relevant option. We saw Kirk Cousins last year, Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. All 3 were great assets. I think Darnell Mooney could be a really good asset, especially now that the defenses are not focused on him. They're going to be focused on London and Pitts and Bijan. He's going to be very sneaky. He can stretch the field. I'm thinking Darnell Mooney is going to have some fantasy relevance. I think the upside is obviously very capped due to the fact that he is not the first target in the offense, or the second, or maybe he's not even the third, depending on how many targets Bijan gets. But he's going to have some big games. So in a best ball league, if you get him with like your 18th round pick, I don't mind that at all.
Yeah, I know quarterbacks are up next, so I know we're going to talk about this. But for me, just being, I guess, I love the Darnell Mooney signing, and it's very I'm being very selfish whenever I say this, but I think Darnell Mooney is the perfect player to where he's going to stretch the field for the Atlanta Falcons. But he's not a high volume guy, right? Like, it's not like they just drafted Rome Odunze. It's not like they just drafted Malik Neighbors to Atlanta. Like, they got a guy to where he is going to have spike weeks for fantasy purposes, because all it takes is 1 or 2 plays. But then at the same standpoint, Drake London and Kyle Pitts, 2 guys that I love a ton, they're still going to get their volume. And now defenses have to respect what they can do over the top from an offensive standpoint, because of what Darnell Mooney can do to stretch the field. So for that reason, it was one of my favorite signings, because it opened the field even more for Kyle Pitts and for Drake London, following what they did at the quarterback position. I know we'll talk about that in a second. So Darnell Mooney's fantasy value significantly, for that specifically, it wasn't a huge deal for me, but I loved what it did for everybody else in that offense. So I'm going to have way more Atlanta Falcons exposure next year than I need to, but that's either here nor there.
Yeah. And we're going to go ahead and talk about the Atlanta Falcons right now, moving into quarterbacks, because Drew Scott.
Yeah, man.
You were banging that drum on X a couple of days ago. You wanted Kirko Chains in Atlanta so bad. And my man, not only did he get it, but he got the bag. He got the sign of faith, 4 years, $180 million. Dog, everybody
guaranteed to.
Everybody's eating but Kirk Cousins in Atlanta, right?
Oh, he's eating. No, he is also eating. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, look, Kirk Cousins is going to be the same guy he was. Like, even with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, he was still just, at best, he was a back-end quarterback 1, because he doesn't have the rushing upside that a lot of other quarterbacks offer. So, he's getting he's getting a little bit less of a version of that with Drake. Like, I'll just say this: I do not think that Drake London is just Justin Jefferson. Okay, so it is a downgrade from a wide receiver one standpoint, but I also will say for the casual folks that just watch football, I don't think you guys understand just how good Drake London really is, and I think Kirk Cousins is really going to help bring that to light. Like, if you gave Justin Jefferson, Marcus Mariota, and Desmond Ridder over the last couple of years, and you gave Drake London, Kirk Cousins over the last couple of years, I think we'd be looking at Drake London a little bit differently. That's no knock to Justin Jefferson. He's going to be great regardless. But I think with what we saw him make happen with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hockenson and Jordan Addison, it's going to just change things tremendously for Drake London and Kyle Pitts specifically. It's so easy to forget. Like, we all love Sam Laporta, right? Like, Sam Laporta is a stud, and I'm not arguing that. Sam Laporta and Kyle Pitts are the same age, and Kyle Pitts has 1,000. There's one tight end that has 1,000-yard season under his belt, and it's not Sam Laporta. It's Kyle Pitts with Matt Ryan at quarterback as a rookie that has the 1,000-yard season under his belt. And so I feel like we're forgetting how good these pass catchers in Atlanta are. And Kirk Cousins is going to very quickly remind us of how good they are. And so I think for those of us that are aware of that right now, we're going to be able to take advantage of values in drafts that won't exist, come this time next year, whenever Kirk Cousins is in the second year of his deal with Atlanta. And we're like, oh, these Drake London, these Kyle Pitts guys, turns out they're pretty good. They just needed a quarterback that could actually get them the ball, So I am so excited. So for the quarterback position specifically, I'm not going to be dying to draft Kirk Cousins because his upside is capped with the lack of rushing upside, but the pieces around him get such an upgrade to me automatically. Like, Kyle Pitts is, maybe this is crazy. I don't know. I think Kyle Pitts is in the discussion for the overall tight end one next season, assuming they don't add a Romo Dunze or Malik Neighbors in the NFL draft. If Kyle Pitts stays as a true, he's the clear number one, number two option for Atlanta with Kirk Cousins as a quarterback, I don't think it's that crazy to say that Kyle Pitts ends up as the tight end one next offseason. I don't think it's that crazy to say that Drake London is a borderline wide receiver one next offseason, wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12.
Yeah,
I don't think it's that crazy.
It's really possible. Looking at the passing volume, here's the thing though. I will fight back you. I like everything you said. I will fight back you a little bit about Kirk Cousins. Sure. I think he could be a very good fantasy quarterback. I know, obviously, and also we have to keep in mind he had Achilles tear. We got to keep that in mind for heading next year. He's 35 years old, so just you got to watch that and make sure it's good. But he has a lot of time to recover. He got injured pretty early last season, so.
And he doesn't rely on mobility much either.
He's a pocket passer, so it's going to help him out there. It's not the same as Lamar Jackson having Achilles tear. It's a completely different kind of thing. Yeah, but Kirk Cousins in 2022, man, QB6 on the year in 6-point passing touchdown scoring. Yeah. And this past year, he was on pace for pretty much the same fantasy points per game. He was on pace to be a top 6 quarterback in fantasy. If this dude gets the pass, because the thing is, last year Atlanta was so run heavy because they used a lot of Bijan and a lot of Tyler Algier. This year, if they decide, Bijan's our best player in the backfield, which is so obvious, and they just decided to use him as their workhorse guy and decide to pass the ball a ton with Kirk Cousins and two of these weapons, Kirk Cousins could get an amount of passing volume that's just insanity, and it could drive him to those low-end QB1 numbers. And I don't think he's going to be drafted there. I think he's going to be drafted a little outside that range because, number one, he's always been underrated in his career. He just has.
Yes.
And number two, he is off an Achilles tear. But I think if you take the risk on him and he finishes QB4, QB6, I think you can get him in that. I think he could get up there in that range. And I think it's totally worth it to take a shot in a 6-point pass touchdown league because the volume could be insane for him this year. The Falcons could take a whole turn with their new coaching, with their new offensive scheme, and take Kirk Cousins to the next level in terms of passing volume and as a result, in terms of fantasy points.
Yeah, I was doing some Cousins data a while back, and in terms of points per game, he was up there.
He was unreal.
Dude. He was unreal last year before he got hurt. So, guys,
we
got a lot.
Real quick, hey, I know we have a lot to go over, but I just want to drive this point home for Kyle Pitts specifically, okay? Because I feel like he's being disrespected because he had he as a rookie, he came in and he had an incredible rookie year, and then the last couple years have been terrible. So, TJ Hawkinson, his catchable target rate, 2023 was 81.1%, 2022 was 79.8%. Kyle Pitts' catchable target rate was 64% and 59.3% the last 2 years.
Numbers, dude.
So we're talking about a 20% difference in a stat where the gap should not be that big. Okay. And then like even touchdown catches, I feel like are the least like it's tough to predict touchdown catches, right? But Hawkinson has had 6 touchdowns and 5 touchdowns the last 2 years with Kirk Cousins, where Pitts has had 5 total touchdowns over the last 2 years. So it's like you're going to have to work really hard to convince me that Kyle Pitts is not just having a humongous upgrade, compared to what he's dealt with the last 2 years since Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, I know, was his quarterback with Kyle Pitts' rookie year, and I thought there was nowhere to go but up, and I was so very wrong with Mariota and Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. But Kirk Cousins is like I just don't want to let it go of how much of an upgrade that is, and Kyle Pitts. Yeah. Kyle Pitts straight line to the moon to me, and Bijan Robinson. We have a coaching staff that hopefully understands what they have at running back between Bijan and assuming he gets the workload he deserves. I think there's room for Kirk Cousins to be a backing quarterback 1, and then I think that Kyle Pitts is going to be top 2, top 3 in his positions. I think that Drake London is going to be wide receiver 1, and I think that Bijan Robinson has overall running back 1 upside. So I'm just way too excited for this Falcons offense. Clearly.
Unreasonably excited. So look, and coming from a Saints fan, I don't like that either, Drew. I don't like how excited you are right now because it just scares me.
Dude, they will be a good playoff contender.
Yeah. Yep. So really quickly, let's talk about Baker re-signing with Tampa. Drew, you mentioned our Dave Canales love affair that we had last year during the season. Mm-hmm. The question I want to ask is, Baker's too good to have a Geno fall off without Dave Canales, right?
I don't think it's completely tied to the coach, but I think there's reason to be concerned. I think there's reason for to at least expect to be a little bit of a step back. Now, I don't think you have to be nervous drafting Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, but if you're come August, if you're depending on Baker Mayfield as your QB1, you should be nervous for a good reason. Now, in a super flex league, if he's your QB2, or in a 1 quarterback league, if you're depending on him to be a streamer, I don't think that that's a bad option because the pass catching options around him are still good with or without Dave Canales there. But if you're depending on him as your QB1 in a super flex league, I would be a little nervous, and I would think that there's reason for expecting them to decline a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead, Hutch.
I just wanted to say, sorry, one quick thing. I will challenge you a little bit about Chris Godwin. Do you guys realize how bad he was last year?
Unfortunately, I do know how bad he was last year. Yeah.
He was almost out of the top 30 receivers in fantasy points last year in PPR formats, which is a PPR, which is where he dominates because of how many catches he can have over the middle. Baker Mayfield was not looking his way. He just wasn't. Evans was the guy, and Godwin was just not getting the volume, and he was getting solid volume, but the catches were just so short and over the middle that it just wasn't enough.
Yeah. So and for whatever reason, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, the design screens that Chris Godwin used to thrive off of, for whatever reason last year, that went way down. Yeah. So to your point, Hutch, I think, that's something to where Chris Godwin could turn into a value if you see a world where those numbers go back up. But that's a very fair concern to where Chris Godwin was a guy I liked a lot as a value. I was the dumbass that called Mike Evans a bust last year, right? So obviously I was like, hey,
Godwin.
fade Mike Evans, draft Chris Godwin, and it was the exact opposite way around. So that one definitely burnt me in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Godwin, I loved him too heading into last season. Didn't quite work out. But speaking of eras that didn't quite work out, guys, the Russell Wilson era ended on very poor terms in Denver. But now, Hutch, I promise I'd make you cringe. Mr. Unlimited gets to the very limited offensive brain power of Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator. Hutch,
good.
Discuss this with me.
Yeah, this is bad. I don't see this as good. I'm not gonna lie. I really don't. Look, it's just I want to point out real quick how hilarious it is that not only does Denver have an $85 million cap hit this year from Russell Wilson, dead cap hit, they're gonna have to eat that. They also are paying him nearly $40 million in cash while the Steelers are paying him 1.2. I just think it's freaking hilarious how all that's played out. And I think it's totally a shot at Denver and they totally deserve it. But Russell Wilson is not going to fix the Steelers, guys. He's not. This is a Band-Aid that's going to be eventually have to be ripped off after one season. I'm not confident at all that Russell Wilson do anything more for the Steelers than they were last year. I really don't. But especially when you lose Deontay Johnson, when you still have the horrible offensive line, like this offense is just got worse this past year. Besides the quarterback obviously is an upgrade. Russell Wilson's an upgrade, but it's not enough to the point where the Steelers they won't win more than 10 games. They won't make it past the wild card round unless they get a miracle, and they just won't go anywhere else. This is a Band-Aid move, and I don't see a significant upgrade for anyone in this offense besides maybe George Pickens, because Russell Wilson, when you look at his stats in Denver, this dude chucked the ball down the field more than almost any other quarterback in the entire National Football League. He threw up the 50-50 balls to Sutton. He threw downfield. He did not care. He was chucking it all game long. Pickens is that kind of attitude. He wants to run deep every play, get it downfield, give me one-on-one situations. I will come up with the ball. That is this offense George Pickens wants. That is the style he wants to play. And if Russell Wilson and George Pickens get connected on that, Pickens could have a really, really good season for fantasy. So obviously we got to watch because the Steelers are limited wide receiver now a lot. They're probably going to draft somebody. So let's see how that goes. Yeah. But I think Pickens and Russ could have a good connection. That's the only positive thing I'm seeing from this. Otherwise, I'm just seeing a step back, just a lost year for Steelers as they go 9-8 or 10-7 and lose in the wild card round. This is just a stall year, honestly.
Yeah,
it really is. They're in a key purgatory. They just are.
No, I agree. And the only other positive I can take away from this is if I agree with Hutch that I think that they are a prime candidate to land a pass catcher early on in the draft. If they don't, though,
don't they say to pick 20?
Yeah, they're right 20, there. Right? They're right there in the first. Like they're in that
there.
Sweet like last year it was JSN, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson that went off like right in that range. Like they're in that range this year. If somehow they pass on a pass catcher, it's at least a positive for Pat Freiermuth, where maybe he is now the number 2 option.
No, it's Darnell Washington, man, with Arthur Smith.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, whoever we think the tight end one is. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, you gotta watch that. I'm like, as much as I want to joke, I'm dead serious though. Like Darnell Washington could legit.
You really don't know
this year. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Not messing
around.
But
like that's the like that's my tight end philosophy. Essentially, if you're not the elite, if you're not the Travis Kelce of tight ends, like I just want you to be. I want the realm of possibilities. I want you to be able to be the number 2 on your team in targets. And if Pittsburgh does not land anybody of significance, it could very well be Pickens and Freiermuth, assuming that Arthur Smith doesn't do his best job to mess that up. So that's really the only positive I could take from that. But again, we still have to go through the NFL draft to see if that ends up being the case too. Because if they add somebody of significance in the first round, then at that point all bets are off all over again.
So. Yeah, getting really quickly because Drew, you just provided me the perfect segue. Just really quickly, want to touch on all these tight ends real quick. Dalton Schultz resigns with Houston. Hunter Henry stays with New England. Noah Fant resigns with Seattle. Mike Gesicki goes to Cincinnati. Gerald Everett goes to Chicago. For fantasy purposes, let's start with Hutch, then to you, Drew. Are any of these guys really super significant in the fantasy space this coming season?
I mean, I like Mike Gesicki in Cincinnati. Maybe he's an athletic tight end. He could get a couple targets, but I think the upside's very, very capped there. I mean, maybe if T. Higgins gets traded, we could see something more relevant for Mike Gesicki, but I'm not crazy invested in Mike Gesicki here. But looking at Dalton Schultz, I like this deal. I mean, Dalton Schultz staying with Houston is great for C.J. Stroud. It's his tight end, a quarterback's best friend. And he was really good for him last year. He's a very underrated athletic tight end. And he was a bottom tier tight end 1 in fantasy last year. And while that's gross, while it's sometimes weird, I think the value is going to be there for him because people just see him as a very, very just bleh tight end when I see him as a tight end 1. And I think for as long as he's in Houston with that offense and with that quarterback, he's probably going to be a tight end 1 in fantasy.
Yeah, whenever you look at tight ends for fantasy purposes, you're like I mentioned, you're obviously looking for the guys that ideally could be 1 or 2 in their offense in terms of pass catching options. But once you get beyond that, you're really just looking for guys that can score touchdowns. Who's better to be, a good offense, a good quarterback tied to CJ Stroud. I agree completely, because like in terms of the guys that you listed off, like Dalton Schultz, Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, like Noah Fant is not going to be a number 1 or number 2 option in an offense whenever you've got.
He's probably not number 3.
Right, yeah, you've got DK Metcalf, you've got Tyler Lockett, you've got JSN. So his upside is maybe the number 3 option, and then most likely out comes number 4. And then Dalton Schultz, he's shown the upside already in terms of touchdown scoring, but he does still have Nico Collins and Tank Dell to deal with. Now, Hunter Henry, on the surface, hey, maybe he has something to offer because there's not a lot of pass catching options to compete with. But then at the same point,
that's true.
Passes in the first place, though. Like there still has to be some scoring upside there. So I mean, he is a veteran to where maybe if they don't, if they do take a quarterback in the top 3 without trading down, maybe there's a situation where Hunter Henry is the number 2 option in that offense, but still nothing that you love. I think the thing that Hutch touched on that intrigues me the most is, hey, what if T. Higgins, what if his trade offer gets entertained? What if T. Higgins is no longer in Cincinnati, and then you have Mike Gesicki there with Jamar Chase? Now I'm intrigued. So you have to do a little bit of forecasting with these tight ends because it's not always how it appears to be on paper. So it's really tough. Like there's nothing that was a huge needle mover for me at the tight end position. It's kind of just status quo, but you have to kind of you have to forecast a little bit at the tight end position to try to find those guys that could have elevated scoring situations.
Yeah.
Right.
Sal August said that Mike Gesicki, he is a talented player. He's an athletic, talented player who just tried to get put in a blocking role in Miami, and that just didn't work out for him. So I'm really hoping Cincinnati sees that and is like, maybe we can unlock him.
Yeah.
Really, I would just keep an eye on him.
So real quick, let's go ahead and speaking of T. Higgins, let's play really quickly around the frames, just 1-word answers. Let's play guess the landing spot on a few significant guys left. Let's off the guy we just talked about, Hutch. Where do you think T. Higgins lands?
I'm going to be honest. I don't think the Bengals take his trade request. I think this is a dumb move for T. Higgins to request a trade, to be honest. I would say for him, play on the franchise tag, have a big year, and then demand a big contract afterwards, because the wide receiver market is, it's not 1 word. Sorry, I know I'm going a little longer. The wide receiver market is about to be reset. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase are owed contracts, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. These 3 are going to reset the market at the wide receiver position. That means T. Higgins, if you were to go to free agency after this year, a massive contract's coming. He could get a bigger contract. And he just had a down year with like 3 different injuries and a lot of inconsistency. I don't know if demanding these trades is a smart move. If T. Higgins is smart, he's staying in Cincinnati and playing on that franchise tag.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. The guy who Justin Fields, I mean, God, it's looking rough right now for him, huh?
Oh, what do we even do with Justin Fields? Because I don't want him to go back to Vegas because that's too many familiar faces. Like he has issues with Vegas, right? I think like if he's not going to go to Minnesota, that would be kind of my dream situation. Like if they don't go get a JJ McCarthy, or if they don't trade up in the NFL draft, like let him be surrounded by weapons. As much as I don't want to say it, because I'm a Rams fan and I don't want him in the same division, because I'm a Justin Fields believer. I think that he is a talented quarterback. I think that he is better than what his picture is perceived to be. I think Seattle could be a really interesting landing spot for him. If Geno Smith doesn't play out, like Drew Lock is out of the picture now, so they need a backup. Geno Smith, I love the resurgence he's had the last couple years, but if he doesn't play out, it's a very, it's a low risk, high reward type of thing for Seattle. I don't want to see them do that because I don't want to deal with Justin Fields if that works out. But I think he's really drawn this. Justin Fields and Trey Lance, they're 2 very different prospects, but I think they've both had kind of very unfair shakes at being a starting quarterback at this point. Like whenever you look at the situation in Chicago right now compared to the situation in Chicago whenever Fields was drafted, like Chicago looks like a dream landing spot right now compared to what it looked like whenever Fields was drafted to Chicago. So I think that Caleb Williams is deserving of the number 1 overall pick. I think that's the direction they should go, but I just don't think that we've seen the best of Justin Fields.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I can too. Yeah.
All right, last one, probably the last big receiver domino to fall. Hollywood Brown, where does he land?
I would say he's going to be a Kansas City Chief. There's already been interest. There's been rumors circling, but it just makes too much sense. Hollywood is the perfect fit for this Chiefs offense because right now what they need, they have a tight end, Travis Kelce, who can take a lot of volume. They have a receiver who can take a lot of stuff in the middle, and Rashee Rice. He's a bully in the inside that can use some of his yak ability to get around and use those intermediate areas well. You need a field stretcher. You need somebody who can stretch the field. I'm not talking about Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Please don't do that again. You need someone like Marquise Brown. This is a legit wide receiver who can really spread the field and really help out your offense and be a great X receiver on the outside that they don't really have right now. This would be a perfect fit. I would love this for his fantasy value, for the Chiefs offense. Marquise Brown into Kansas City would be my fit, and it's my prediction too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best options. Like, I think it's the top. I think it's the top dogs in the AFC. Like get him to Kansas City, or even get him to Buffalo. Like
I like that one too.
He's a much better receiver than Gabe Davis is. I know that the Khalil Shakir guys aren't going to like to hear that because right now he is a very clear path to some fun volume for next year as a sleeper draft pick. But Khalil Shakir, Hollywood Brown, they would play very different roles in this offense, and so I think that he could fit in seamlessly next to Stephon Diggs as well if they're serious about wanting to be contenders and wanting to surround Josh Allen around talent. They've missed out on the other top guys. So I think that would be Kansas City's like that's the one where I would love to see it just from a real NFL perspective and a fantasy perspective as well. But I think that the two top dogs in the AFC, at least as far as I'm concerned, I think that that's where he should be looking.
Yeah. Hollywood Brown, KC makes too much sense for it to not happen. So guys, that is our free agency rundown, blowout, whatever you want to call it. Hutch, before we get you out of here, any other last plugs you want to make? And perhaps this is a question I'd like to end y'all with. Do you have one bold prediction for fantasy football this coming season?
Oh, I mean, let me stall while I talk about where you follow me on Twitter before I think about the bold prediction. You can follow me on Twitter at HutchinsonB_FF. And I make content with football guys. I make content with Dynasty League football. And I'm also co-host with Luke Stallhook, Hooked on Fantasy. Check out wherever you get your podcasts. A bold prediction for this coming season. Man, I'm going to put this out here right now. And, Jacksonville hasn't drafted a receiver yet. They haven't gone through the draft process yet, so we don't know what they've done. But I think right now, as the receiving room stands, if there's not any crazy significant additions, Christian Kirk will be a top 15 receiver in fantasy. And very, very possibly top 12. He was a top 12 receiver in the first year he had in Jacksonville. So I would not, I'm going to say it, top 12 receiver. If the receiving room is left pretty much as is, he will be a top 12 receiver in fantasy.
Love that.
That's fair. It's very fair.
All right, guys, that is our show. Once again, we want to thank all of you for joining up with us tonight. I know we went a little bit long, but always appreciate having you guys. Love you hanging out with us. Love doing all the things we do. For my man, Drew Scott, at Drew3MR. For my man, Hutch Brown, at HutchinsonB_FF. For my boy, Chris Battista, who could not be here, at FFChrisB. And for myself, Rhett Manuel, at RManuel Sports. Thank you guys for showing up with us tonight. We gone. Y'all be blessed.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.